Happy Halloween, everyone. Today we're getting spooky and checking out some Halloween Mandela effects. First of all, here's the definition of the Mandela effect. Go ahead and pause and read it if you're new to the concept or you just want a refresher. Secondly, this is a collection of Halloween-themed Mandela effects, meaning we're going to cover a wide variety of topics. Some I've never covered before and some I have. Everything from scary movies and candy collected through trick-or-treating to creepy historical changes and real-life events. So turn off those lights, sit back, and relax. But not too much. The year is 1973, and the movie The Exorcist just released. Audiences across the nation are terrified. The cussing, the gore, the special effects, and story was incredibly scary for its time. So much so that it launched an entirely new genre of horror movies. The Exorcist was burnt into the zeitgeist of American cinema, and has since been called one of the scariest movies of all time. If you watch it nowadays, I would argue that it's not quite as scary as a lot of those people remember, but times have changed, we've seen a lot of scary movies since. So regardless of how you feel about this movie, if you have seen it, I have a Mandela effect for you. Remember poor Reagan, tied to the bed and possessed? Did Reagan have a feeding tube in her nose during The Exorcist? Yes or no? Well, it turns out in a lot of scenes, she actually did. How convenient that it disappeared before her head spun around. Otherwise, that'd be an especially awkward scene. Many people don't remember this feeding tube, but there it is. What do you think? Do you remember this feeding tube from The Exorcist, or is this another case of the Mandela effect? October 30th, 1938, the day before Halloween. Famed writer George Orson Welles performed the terrifying radio adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel, The War of the Worlds. This Halloween special radio broadcast was a fictional news report of aliens violently invading Earth. Now, here is the Mandela effect for those of you who learned about this in school. What was the effect of this radio broadcast? Did it cause mass panic across the country, or did it cause very little panic across the country? If you're like me, you remember learning that this day before Halloween radio broadcast caused major panic across the country. Police were called, workers left what they were doing to hide, people jumped off buildings, and emergency services were overwhelmed with calls. This was taught to us in school to highlight the power the media has over the population, and how it must be used responsibly. Or at least that's what I took away from it. As it turns out now, there was never a major panic. No one died, no one jumped, nothing of the sort happened. In fact, Adolf Hitler himself joined in on the mass hysteria and publicity and used it as an example of, quote, evidence of the decadence and corrupt condition of democracy. Very weird. Now, some theorize that the reports came out to artificially sell newspapers. Others say it was never a big deal to begin with. And the rest of us are just left scratching our heads. So what do you remember learning about? Or, if you happen to be old enough, what do you remember about this broadcast? Do you remember learning that the special Halloween radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds caused mass panic? Or has the Mandela effect struck again? Let me know in the comments below. Remember the Salem witch trials? Tell me, how were the witches executed? Was it being drowned? Or was it burnt at the stake? What do you remember? Most seem to remember them being drowned or being burnt at the stake. Not anymore. Now history tells us that it was neither of those. They were actually killed by hanging. In 1692, the suspicion of witchcraft had run rampant in America and reached a fever pitch in Salem, Massachusetts. A group of young women claimed that others were practicing witchcraft, and so began the infamous Salem witch trials. By the time the trials had come to an end, over 150 men, women, and children had been accused, and 19 were executed. How were they executed? Again, most of us remember the witches being drowned or being burnt at the stake, but it turns out that wasn't the case. All of the Salem witches were hung, apart from one male, who died after being pressed under stones for refusing to confess. So tell me what you think. I had always believed that they were burnt alive, but that seemingly never happened in America. Is this a Mandela effect for you too? Again, let me know in the comments below. Are you going to dress up for Halloween this year? If you are, might I suggest the classic vampire look of Lestat from the 1994 movie Interview with a Vampire? Or is it Interview with the Vampire? Admit it, I caught you off guard with that quick transition, huh? So which did you choose? Is it A or is it the? The correct answer for the film adaptation of Anne Rice's classic novel is Interview with the Vampire. What's interesting to me is that the German title of this movie translates to Interview with a Vampire. This is one of those Mandela effects where I'm sure the split is much closer to 50-50 than most. So where do you fall? Also, as a side note, this movie came out in 1994? Really? I thought it'd be closer to the 2000s. Am I alone in that thought? There were a lot of Halloween-themed Mandela effects to choose from, so making this list was pretty difficult. So for number 1, let's do a lightning round of a bunch of Halloween-themed Mandela effects. And just so this goes quicker, I'm going to shorten the timer to 5 seconds instead of the usual 10. Let's do it. What did Frankenstein's monster have in his neck? Bolts or electrodes? It turns out that Frankenstein's monster had electrodes in his neck in the 1931 movie, not bolts, and in the original book, Frankenstein's monster had neither. What do you remember? Who was the creator and host of the 1959 to 1964 TV show, The Twilight Zone? Was it Rod Serling or was it Rod Sterling? It seems that a lot of people remember it being Rod Sterling, but it is in fact Rod Serling. I've seen a lot of arguing over this online, so where did you fall on this one? In the classic 1984 movie Gremlins, what is the name of the leader of the evil Mogwais who later become evil gremlins? Was his name Spike or Stripe? It is actually Stripe now. Now this one makes me scratch my head because I swear it was Spike. This is definitely a weird one. For the next two, let's ask some trick-or-treat questions, and by that I mean candy. Candy Mandela effects. First up, how do you spell Sweetarts? Is it Sweetarts, Sweetarts, or Sweetarts? So this one captured attention recently because the word only has one T in the middle between sweet and tarts, which makes this candy Sweetarts, or Sweetarts. I don't know. I've said it enough times while recording this that it all sounds wrong. So what do you remember? Has Sweetarts always had one T in the middle? Here's another candy Mandela effect that freaked out my grandma because this is one of her favorite candies. How do you spell cowtails? Is it cowtails, as in T-A-L-E-S? Or is it cowtails, as in cow T-A-I-L-S? Considering this candy is shaped and colored like a cow's tail, you'd assume it's cowtails, as in T-A-I-L-S. But nope, this is supposedly cowtails, T-A-L-E-S, as in fairy tales. I don't get it either. I have no idea. Remember Scary Movie 2 from 2001? Well, there's a scene where David Cross's character has fallen out of a window, and the butler reaches out with his malformed hand to save him. So help me out here. There's a funny and memorable line in the scene where the butler extends his smaller hand and says what? Is it, "Take my strong hand," or is it, "Take my hand"? Alright, so this one's pretty crazy. A huge amount of people remember this as, "Take my strong hand," which is funny because that hand is obviously not his strong hand. But as of now, that line is never said in this movie. Is that what you remember? King Tut's sarcophagus was recovered in 1924 in Egypt, and became famous around the world for its intricate design. I'm sure you remember what his sarcophagus looks like, right? That iconic gold and blue is instantly recognizable to most. But here is what isn't. What animal is on his sarcophagus? Is it a cobra, a vulture, or both? The correct answer is both. Many people seem to only remember a cobra though, so where do you stand? Did you always know that there was a vulture awkwardly placed to the side of the snake? Or did you remember it some other way? Let me hear it in the comments below. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. It was essentially over 10 Halloween Mandela effects, but I felt like I couldn't really justify each one as being a really long segment. So I shoved a bunch of them into number 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a safe and fun Halloween, and until next time, never stop searching.